अस्सलाम नाज़रीन, मैं हूं बैरिस्टर शहजाद अकबर और आप देख रहे हैं मेरा यूट्यूब चैनल। आज का जो स्पेशल वीलॉग है ये अपनी रूटीन से हटकर है और आप देख सकते हैं कि आई हैव अ गेस्ट विद मी। और आज का जो वीलॉग होगा ये अंग्रेज़ी में होगा और बड़ा इम्पोर्टेंट दिन है और कुछ इम्पोर्टेंट अपडेट्स हैं उनके ऊपर बात करेंगे। अभी मैं अंग्रेज़ी में स्विच कर जाऊंगा। I have a special guest with me. He's a very dear old friend. Old, I say that he is old, but also he's my old friend. We have worked a lot together for many, many years. And now some of you might know Clive Stafford Smith, spearheading release of Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani woman who is in American prison for very long. And in a way, it's a household name in Pakistan that a lot of people know about her. But I think after having worked with Clive on this issue as well, I have to admit I did not honestly know about Afia Siddiqui. I knew a lot what was being said about her and spread about her, but not what the reality is. A lot of Pakistanis are confused about Afia. There's a side which thinks Afia is very bad person, evil person, and she's rightly in American prison. And then there's a side who call her daughter of Pakistan and who has been wronged, and she's wrongly imprisoned in America. But without having any judgmental call about it, we'll just jump straight to Clive. But the point of actually having this interview today, we've been talking about it for a long time that we will put Clive's interview on my video logs. But today is a special day. Today is when we are recording this. It's the 20th of January 2025, and American president, the former president tenure has come to an end, and new President Trump has come into office. President Biden, in his last hour of presidency, has given a lot of clemencies, but there was a effort from Clive. He also initiated litigation in Pakistan that we will talk about in detail. But I think I'll jump to Clive and we'll talk about why we are doing this today. And first of all, I would like Clive to update us about Afia's case that he had been pursuing in the United States. He had online petition and signatures, I believe, of over 1.5 million. We'll start with Clive, and Clive, tell us what is the situation with Afia?
Well, I am both jet lagged and really, really deeply disturbed by the fact that today, as probably one of the very last actions that Joe Biden took as US president, as the most powerful person on the planet, having just pardoned a whole bunch of his family in addition to his son, he sent me at 12:45, as in 15 minutes before the end of his tenure, the denial of clemency for Afia Siddiqui. And it's really hard to take that you pardon your own family for things they've never even been accused of, and goodness knows whether they did. But with Afia, I've been to Afghanistan 4 times. I've traveled around Pakistan. We've sued everyone in Pakistan, in America, in 3 different places, and so forth. And I filed 76,600 word clemency petition that just dismantled not only the case against her, but proved without any room for doubt that she was originally kidnapped from Karachi by the CIA in league with the Pakistan government of Pervez Musharraf, and kidnapped not just her. The thing that really gets me as a parent is kidnapped her with her 3 children, dropped the 6-month-old Suleiman on his head apparently and killed him, but they've never had the guts to admit that, and then took the other 2 children, 3-year-old Mariam, to Kabul, where they forcibly adopted her into a white Christian American family on the obvious principle that it's better to be white Christian American, apparently, than a Pakistani Muslim of color. She was there for 7 years. They called her Fatima instead. And she's only ever got out of there thanks to her aunt Fauzia. And then they took the son, Ahmed, age 6, to Kabul and put him in prison for 5 years and called him Isan Ali and said if he ever said his name was Ahmed again, they'd kill him. They took Afia herself to Bagram, where I now have 9 separate witnesses I've got under oath who say they saw her there and she was being tortured. And, what do you have to do to get clemency from this Biden fella?
I think, Clive, before we go on to clemency, I think there's one point that we need to make clear, as you're saying, that Afia was abducted from Karachi, and then she was rendered illegally to the Americans, who basically put her in prison in Bagram. And I think by saying this, we are simplifying a lot of complicated facts in between. But tell us, I think one people they're not clear about is that once, and I think later on Musharraf also admitted in his book that they actually sold a lot of Pakistanis for bounties to Americans. So once she was in Bagram, an American prison, what happens then? What happens and how she ends up in the US? And
so first there's the problem of when I ask you, Shahzad, are you a terrorist? What do you say?
No.
Well, then I slap you.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Well, I think there will be a time when I'll say yes.
There will be a time when I start pulling your fingernails out. The problem with all of this stuff with Musharraf is his people sold more than half of Guantanamo to the Americans for bounties. And the Americans weren't torturing people because they thought they were innocent. They were torturing them because Musharraf had said they were guilty. And so until they said they were guilty, they were lying presumptively. So they applied all this torture until finally you say, yeah, I am a terrorist. And at that point, the question is, how do you prove you're not? If you're locked up incommunicado in Guantanamo Bay. Now, it was even worse for Afia, because she was taken to Bagram where they tried to torture her into saying she was a terrorist. Can I just ask you, Shahzad, they may not teach you anything in a Pakistani school, I don't know, we'll find out. Can you shoot down a satellite?
A satellite, probably no.
No, you mean they're just useless in Pakistan schools. They don't teach you to shoot down satellites. So they had this young woman who had done her PhD in education, and they had her write out a statement about how to shoot down satellites. And when I saw that, far too late, I wish I'd seen it and I'd done her trial, I find that the statement she wrote was on a page of a magazine called Discover magazine, which I sent off for, and I found that she'd simply copied the page before. But the crucial thing about that magazine was it was dated December 2007, and it was only a print copy. It wasn't online. So that means and it was only published in America. So the only way that document could have got to Afia was if what she said was true, which is the CIA brought it there and made her write this nonsense out. So this is how it worked. You were sold by Musharraf. He said you're a bad person. The Americans then tortured you. They made you create evidence that was just total nonsense. And then they thought, she's a terrorist. But in the end, in Bagram, they decided she wasn't a terrorist, that it was all nonsense. So they wanted to let her go. And here the irony is that by then Fawzia, her fabulous sister, had stirred up so much support for her in Pakistan. This was now July 2008. Musharraf was still president, but he was teetering, it was very close to the end. And he was feeling weak. And at that point, they didn't want this woman, Afia, to come back to Pakistan because she would have said, I was sold to the Americans, they tortured me, they took my children, they killed one of my children. And that would have been the end for Musharraf. So what they did instead is the ISI concocted a plan to murder her. And what they did was they put her on a bus from where she was in Kabul to a place called Ghazni, which is 150k southwest. They gave her son. He didn't even say he was her son. He was still so terrified from being tortured. He said his name was Isan Ali. And she was so abused that she was incredibly traumatized. They take this bus, and in the bus is a Pakistani ISI agent. I have a photograph of him. I'm happy to share it all around. And his role was to carry a bag that they were going to plant on it. And they'd told that Afia that if she went to this particular mosque, the Khalid bin Walid Mosque, they'd give her daughter and she could go back to Pakistan and live happily ever after. That wasn't what was going to happen. 2 days before, and I've been to Afghanistan, I've got the documentation. 2 days before, a woman who was clearly working with the ISI had called in a death threat saying that the suicide bomber was going to blow herself up outside a mosque. 2 days before, so obviously that was confected. And then the Afghan National Police was meant to show up with their AK-47s, and what you do with a suicide bomber is you ring her, and then you don't want to go too close, you just end up shooting them. And the idea was that they would then be killed, and the headline in the Pakistan media would be, "We told you all along this woman was evil, and not only did she want to do this herself, but she got her own son killed." That was what was meant to happen. The only thing that prevented that from happening was a chap I met in Ghazni called Mohammed Ajmal Mohammadi. No one could talk to her when she's sitting outside this mosque because she spoke Urdu, they spoke Farsi. But he spoke Urdu because he was a tailor and he'd done some tailoring in Pakistan. So he goes up to her. She sat there for 6 hours. And he comes up and says, "You know, it's getting dark out here. It's a war zone. It's 2008 in Afghanistan. Why don't you go stay with my mum tonight?" And she's saying, no, I got to stay here. They're going to give me my daughter. And at that moment, the ANP, the Afghan National Police, show up and they're going to shoot her. Mohammadi, who I admire immensely, stood in front of her and said she's not a suicide bomber. That's what saved her life. Otherwise, she'd have been dead. And so instead of that, she's taken by the Afghan National Police to their headquarters. They find out she's done nothing wrong. Then the Americans hear about it and they show up the next morning, July the 18th. And I should say, the son had been dressed up in a coat in the middle of summer with these 4 big pockets to make him look like a suicide bomber with fruit in them. So she and the son had now taken to the ANP headquarters. And the Americans show up, they want to interrogate her, and the Afghans initially say, no, it's none of your business. Then the Americans do what they do best, and they bribe the chief of police, and he lets them into the room. And she's in a room which is probably 3 times the size of this room, not very big. And she's behind a curtain, and she hears American voices as they come in, and she thinks, oh my goodness, I'm going to be taken back for more torture. So she peeks around the curtain. And at that point, one of the American soldiers sees her and says, she's on the loose, and shoots her twice in the stomach. And at that point, they discover she's an unarmed woman. So they confect this whole silly story about her picking up an M4 rifle. Do you know where the safety catch is on an M4?
No, I wouldn't know.
No, well, you wouldn't make a very good terrorist, obviously. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that I got you to confess. And so she's meant to flip off the safety catch and start shooting at them. They have these 2 holes in the wall that they say is where she fired. But then we found a video from earlier that day, and the 2 holes are there already. So this is all nonsense.
And as we see the picture of Afia, she's a very petite, tiny woman. And M4 rifle, I believe, is quite large.
It's a machine gun. And there's no way that happened. That's just nonsense. But the trouble is, having taken her, ironically, back to Bagram and patched her up and saved her from dying, whether that was a favor or not, I don't know, they took her to New York, where she had a trial where no witnesses were there for her because her defense was unable to investigate in Afghanistan in 2009, 2010. And so she goes to trial. The only witnesses there are American military witnesses. They all tell their lies. And she gets 86 years.
86 years.
Yeah.
So what happened with the lawyers that she had? Apparently, I think we were led to believe that Pakistani government at that time had provided for some lawyer to represent her during the trial.
The Pakistani government spent $2 million on
$2 million.
$2 million on giving her the worst defense that money could buy. And you got to say there was a massive conflict of interest there, because if I'd been doing the case, my case would have been, she had the right to shoot anyone she wanted to. She was a kidnapped victim, and as a kidnapped victim, you have a right to do that. She'd been kidnapped by the ISI. So the defense should have been, she didn't do it, but even if she did do it, it's not against the law. But the problem is these guys were paid for by the Pakistan government.
So basically, her lawyers were being paid by the people who actually had initially abducted her, and sent her to Afghanistan.
It's exactly that. And Afia objected to that from the beginning, and no one would listen to her. So, and I've talked to the lawyers, and they weren't badly intentioned, I think, but they just put on no defense at all.
So moving forward to that position, to the point where you took on the case and you actively are pursuing her release, and who are actually from Biden administration, in which we can talk later about, you gathered some new revealing evidence which shows that not only that she was in a way framed in this charge, but also the very crucial fact that she was actually in custody of ISI, and then dramatically she appears in Kabul. So all that evidence aside, you also pursued her release with help of Pakistani government, and you brought a litigation, Afia did, and
with the help of the Pakistan government, if you consider that a dentist pulling teeth painfully is help. We had there's a lovely judge in Islamabad High Court, Judge Ija, I always get his name.
Justice Shahzad. Yes.
Yeah, lovely guy, very impressive judge. And he's held the feet of the Pakistan government to the fire the whole time. And, honestly, they're useless. And
I believe they sent 2 senators who actually we never heard of.
There was one senator.
There was one senator.
One senator who had never been to prison before, didn't know anything, was totally unhelpful. And, we wanted them to send the president, the prime minister, and the chief justice. This is an incredibly important case, it seems to me, in Pakistan. I got to say, I've spent over 1,000 hours on the case, way more than that. And Pakistan has spent so little time. And they sent this one senator, I won't name names because it's pointless, but...
you can, but the senator is basically, in a sense, that nameless because it doesn't have any value.
You wouldn't know.
Whereas even today in America, we supposedly have our half of the government trying to get into the oath-taking ceremony, but they won't go to US to actually advocate release of their own citizens.
The thing that was really annoying was the ambassador to
US.
Washington from Pakistan. We had asked the ambassador to come along. I spent 10 days in December and then another week in January going around Congress. I met with 66 senators, congresspersons, and their staff. And we wanted Pakistan to show the flag and say this is really important. So the ambassador didn't show up to any of those meetings.
Any meeting, he did not show.
No, it was worse than that, because then I discovered online that he was actually in Congress the whole time, meeting with other senators, not the whole time, but much of it, meeting other senators and folk, trying to convince them that Pakistan was really a democracy, which is really trying to prove that the sun never rises.
And while he's doing so, he's also trying to advocate the military hybrid rule in Pakistan and calling it a democracy.
Totally. And so, this is just so wrong. And if you take your Pakistan passport out and you look on the inside front page, it says in that passport that when you have one of these Pakistan passports, the government is meant to demand and require that anyone in another country, in this case America, should behave correctly and respect the rights of that individual. And back in the day when the British were annoyingly colonialist. They would send a gunboat if you didn't do it and then blow up your buildings. I don't suggest we do that, but Pakistan, at the very least, for Afia, given that we've had 1.6 million people sign a petition saying they wanted justice for her, you would expect Pakistan to have truly.
Well, Clive, unfortunately, right now the government that Pakistan have, it's not really elected by the people of Pakistan, so therefore they actually watch their own interest. But
but first, to be fair, Shahbaz Sharif wrote a very good letter to President Biden. But this was the real problem. You got the Prime Minister of Pakistan writing a personal letter to the President of the United States. The rule is in diplomacy that they're meant to reply within 7 days saying we've received your letter, and they're meant to reply within 30 days responding to it. He said, please grant clemency to Afia Siddiqui. We couldn't get the Pakistan Ministry of Foreign Affairs to admit that they ever made sure that letter was delivered to the White House.
So there was a letter written by the Prime Minister, which I'm sure they submitted to the Islamabad High Court, but you have no acknowledgement from the Foreign Ministry of Pakistan if this letter was ever delivered to the White House.
It wasn't. It was delivered only to a second level Secretary of the Department of State, Elizabeth Holst. And, there's no evidence it ever got to Biden. But the bottom line is we'd said, and we said to the judge, and the judge said, you've got to deal with this to the government, get a response. Because the way to make sure Biden himself heard about this was to force him to sign a letter and reply. And that still hasn't happened. And goodness knows whether he ever sent a letter back. I doubt we'll ever see one.
Pakistani state seems to be basically, trying to write the letter because it's important for the audience in Pakistan. It only sends it to a second level bureaucrat in their foreign office, American foreign office. It never gets to the U.S. president from them, at least. I'm sure that you people made.
Well, I got it to him, but that's not the same thing.
And at the same time, the representative of government of Pakistan, which basically is enjoying his life in the U.S. on taxpayers' money, never shows up for any briefing.
It's a bit worse than that.